What could your industry be doing, or what are you doing right now to get us all focused on the triple aim of delivering higher quality care at lower cost and still retaining a great customer experience? So maybe we'll start this one out with Dr. Samitt. Do you want to go first?
Sure. I think an overarching comment is that we're facing a landmark moment in our industry, and we must make the switch from a focus on doing more to one where we're doing better. And I think that really applies to all of us. I think the other thing that I would underscore is we need to do so by concentrating on innovation. The strategies that have historically worked won't continue to work for us in the future. So I'll mention briefly my two hats. So as a delivery system, we really have concentrated on, going back to my introductory comments, where can we apply the tools of best practice in other industries and truly apply them to healthcare. So we've invested intensively in the application of technology to healthcare delivery, the role of lean process improvement in revamping our care delivery models, as well as the very power of alignment between the various parts of our system. An organization where hospitals, physicians, and health plans, or a system where hospital physicians and health plans are not working in lockstep will fail in the future, and we need to find a way to integrate them. From a payer perspective, we're concentrating on two things. One is assuring that our providers have access to all the necessary information that they need to make good decisions. I have a deja vu every time I hear the term accountable care organization, mostly because we've used that term, but we've called it something different in the past. And I started my career at Harvard Community Health Plan, and back then it was called managed care. The reality is that we need to focus on better care at a lower cost. In the past, one of the primary reasons that managed care failed was that there was a view that risk was dumped on providers as opposed to helping providers manage risk. As a payer, one of the things that we're certainly concentrating on is assuring that providers know where they generate waste, and then revamping their reimbursement so that we pay them to deliver higher quality and reduce cost.
Okay, thank you very much. Dr. Moen, I know you represent a large delivery system, you've done a lot of innovative work, but you also have some unique relationships that your system is building with payers. Could you speak to both of those areas, what you're doing inside Fairview, but also what are those relationships with the payers?
Well, for us, this really started with the recognition of the need for more physician leadership across our organization. We actually need our clinicians to embrace the work of creating value, not just propagating volume, to Craig's point. And clinicians truly do know where waste in the system is. Certainly the information that Craig and Payors provide gives us more insight, but if you just talk to our physicians, they all know where there's waste in the system. So instead of complaining about it in the doctor's lounge, which is one of the things we do, we actually began to engage our clinicians in owning the creation of value and getting them to embrace this challenge. And where we've had success is actually getting the frontline clinicians and their patients involved in the design and creation of new care delivery models that actually meet patients where they are. Some examples are a team-based model in primary care, which is spread across all of our 41 primary care clinics, recognizing that primary care is not sustainable today in the model, both the clinical model and the payment model that it's encased in. And so we felt the providers were best at breaking that glass and beginning to lead us toward a better model that's more patient-centered, leverages the talents and skills of nurses, pharmacists, behaviorists, social workers, who traditionally have met the patient at the hospital when things fall apart, but actually proactively applying those skills aggressively in patients who actually need them earlier rather than waiting for things to fall apart. We've also had a tremendous focus on behavior change, recognizing that much of our health cost is wrapped up in behavioral medicine, both in terms of psychology and behavioral illness, but also just in behavioral choice around lifestyle. So tremendous focus there. And in terms of an alignment with payers, much to Craig's work as well, we've taken a lot of the data and information that payers have had and put it underneath clinicians and allowed them to actually gain additional insight into where the money is being spent and how they might intervene. A good example is 5% of our patient population spends about 40% of the resource. And who is that 5%? And what of that 5% actually can we proactively engage and change the experience in ways that deliver value? As an example, patients with 19 ER visits in 10 months, we traditionally have just band-aided that instead of actually bringing the patient in and understanding what's going on and reducing that to zero. And we have several examples where we've changed the experience and changed the trajectory of spend by just reducing emergency visits and hospitalizations by proactive engagement of the entire team, and then designing the payment model to actually support that kind of work.
Interesting. Okay, we'll come back to more on that. Dr. Kuntz?
So, I think that what we're trying to do is understand these positive and for the good changes happening in the healthcare systems, understanding the broadening of the stakeholdership and participation in decision-making, and trying to understand how we can bring innovation to that pathway to try to attain the goals that were just articulated. So clearly, we're finally moving from the last remnants of a paternal healthcare system where the physician makes all the decisions and has potentially perverse incentives that has led to large healthcare costs, and directed that to a more patient-centered approach. So if we look at the whole continuum of value chain of stakeholdership, there's a massive demand at every level for information, for participation in the care of patients. And how can a company like ours or small companies try to provide technology solutions and innovations to help those adjacencies? Something we spend a lot of time with. So I spend 20% of my time as a member of the Board of Governors for PCORI, which is a Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute, as a part of the Affordability Care Act. And we've spent a lot of time trying to understand what it means to be patient-centered at every level. That is better endpoints and studies to trying to understand modeling of the results of randomized studies to the specifics of a patient for their best care. In a company like ours, that translates into our putting a lot of money into, say, post-market surveillance, dialing into our devices ways that we can abstract information and communicate the physiological or performance measures of the device to the caregivers over its lifetime, to try to understand how we can make better diagnostic and elements of adjacent therapies that we develop. So instead of just making the box that we put into somebody, how can we look at the broader continuum, try to improve the diagnostic specificity of therapies we place so we can do fewer but more specific and more impactful therapies. At the same time, the management has to also involve ways that we can communicate data back and forth across the devices in the long term. And on top of that is a study solution so that we can constantly monitor the total product life cycle and understand how we can translate the performance of the device so that patients can make better informed decisions. So it's very exciting right now. I think the improvements that my colleagues have made on the right to actually to improve the healthcare delivery systems gives us an amazing opportunity for us to see where we can participate. Not in the management. We don't want to manage patients. That's what physicians and healthcare people do. What we want to do is provide the support systems for better management overall, and they're myriad, and it's quite exciting.
Okay, thank you very much. Dr. Kuntz, you let the cat out of the bag here, bringing up the perverse incentives. If you think about it, if you're inventing things and putting things to market over at Medtronic, you're interested in selling products and to bring in the revenue in a for-profit industry. Over in Dr. Moen's clinics, you have doctors that get paid based generally in the past on the more work they do, the more money they make. And on the payer side, with a a payer, you're really looking at the less care that gets provided, the more the profit. So can you each speak a little bit to these perverse incentives, and what is one thing your industry is doing to try to counter those incentives, to try to change the path? Because at the end of the day, we all have to make enough money to survive, right? We have to pay the doctors, we have to pay the people who are producing the products. The money has to work. The money has to work, and I know you're all doing things to make the money work in the long run. Can you just speak a little bit to that? Do you want to start?
Sure. Thanks. I think it was a very well articulated question for probably what we want to set our strategies against going forward. Clearly, the innovative group we have here is still based on a private sector model where we have to generate a profit, half of which we divide into shareholders, the other half we divide into trying to utilize to acquire new innovations and also to invest in R&D. That process obviously requires growth, and it's so that's a model. What we'd like to do is understand where can we add value and understand where the value propositions can be made in a more proper and less perverse system and still grow at the same time. So I think we're all aware of the notion that in the old fee-for-service method, or still existing fee-for-service method, that there were minimal checks and balances that might have been very advantageous to companies like ours and others for, say, one point in the value chain to make all the decisions. And that would coincide with a marketing and sales plan that would drive focus on one individual, say the implanter. We recognize that system is not optimum for healthcare and also is not going to last much longer. So trying to understand where we can start to spread value, especially in the information side, especially in the patient side, is a way that we're trying to wrestle with in dividing our efforts in R&D to say, how do we try to demonstrate value at every level and still grow? And I think some of the solutions are to get more into the adjacencies of monitoring, of diagnostic, proper application of therapy, and on top of that, more efficient methods of clinical research.
Okay. Dr. Moen?
So really at two levels I'll talk about. One is the macroeconomic level of a system, which means our contracts with payers actually are now designed with shared savings components that reward us for reducing the total cost to a population of patients if we meet certain quality standards in that population. So for us, what that does is create a pool of money that the system can use to invest in the types of things or the types of activities that align incentives on the front line. So on the front line, what that looks like is a new compensation model for our primary care physicians that moves away from counting RVUs or activity into a model that actually rewards primary care teams, team activity for the number of patients they manage, the amount of the severity of that panel of patients, the quality that's generated across that panel of patients over time, the cost of care that that panel of patients experiences based on their risk and a projection of what cost should look like, and also on the patient engagement or patient satisfaction that that team generates with their population. And what we saw across our primary care group when we instituted this model is some physicians' pay went up 50% and some went down 50%. So it generated a fair amount of energy amongst our physician partners and colleagues. But it's very interesting to see when you change the way you measure success, what actually it begins to look like. And so for us, what we also learned, though, is about 80% of our physicians' pay didn't change that much. And there's a take-home lesson there in change, I think, that most of our physicians are actually trying to operate in a way that best serves their population, but we don't have the incentives to design to actually drive that further, harder, and faster. But then on the fringes, we have physicians that are operating quite differently. And actually, we need to align all our physicians toward creating value for a population. So it involves macro arrangements that create economics that then allow systems to apply at the front line the types of incentives that are going to drive us toward a better system overall.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Dr. Samitt?
I think I'm going to take it quickly at three levels. One is at the global system, all of us level, and then is to the provider system, and then to the provider itself. I think the challenge with perverse incentives is that we all have perverse incentives, everyone in this room, all the physicians, the hospitals, the health plans. And the challenge we face as an industry is the pie is not getting bigger. I think everyone's looking for a solution where there's win, 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 win for us all. And I think the reality is that's not the case. The pie is shrinking. I have a very good friend who uses the expression, when the pie shrinks, table manners change. And I think we're facing that as an industry. So I'm not necessarily going to address the tension between the various industry sectors because I think that's very real, and we need to find a way to navigate through that, and I'm sure we'll talk about that. You know, similar to David's comments, my prediction is that we will see many provider systems become larger, more integrated, and be willing to take on risk. I think the days of being paid per unit or being paid per volume at the system level will rapidly diminish over time, and I think that's exactly where CMS wants us all to go, and I think that's frankly where a lot of commercial payers want providers to go as well. They want providers to have skin in the game. But we suffered the greatest indignity within our system in taking that approach. We're a provider-sponsored health plan, so we've borne risk for nearly 3 decades. And we've been capitated for so many years. The challenge we had is we woke up one day and realized that you can't pay your hospitals and physicians in a volume-based manner when you live in a value-based world. So getting to the deepest level, similar to Fairview, we've spent an enormous amount of time redesigning physician compensation to reward better care, not more care. We had a very interesting statistic. We looked at our total cost of care, and we wanted to calculate what percentage of that total cost was driven or what percentage of that total cost was paid to primary care. The answer was quite shocking to us, that in the total cost of care, only 5% was paid to primary care. And when we calculated to what degree primary care physicians generate the remainder of the cost, specialists, hospitals, medical device, pharmaceutical, the remainder, it was another 80%. And so we said it is worth it for us to increase by 50%, double, or even triple primary care incentive compensation if we have them focus more on how they're practicing medicine, not how much they're practicing medicine. So we've spent a lot of time redesigning comp, and similar, again, to David's comments, we've seen dramatic changes in the utilization of services that flow downstream from primary care.